G'day Bomber fans! Well, just like that, the preseason is done and dusted. We can finally look forward to round one without getting ahead of ourselves. But before we talk about that Hawthorn game, because we're going to talk about that a lot, we do have to talk about this practice match. Because, yes, the results are meaningless. The scores really don't matter at all, but that doesn't mean the games don't matter. In fact, there is a lot to take from this game, both negative, of course, but also positive. There was a lot I really liked about it as well. So we're going to talk about the game here today, the way it played out, the structure, the system, and then on Tuesday I'll have my player review and recap out where I go through all the players involved and really just talk about the round one prospects and how we're looking heading into the year. So let's get into it. So for some context and the way that the game played out, it's been a wet week in Ballarat. There was a game called off the other night, Melbourne-Richmond for Lightning, and luckily it didn't come to that for the Essendon St. Kilda game. In fact, I actually think that the conditions, it was raining a bit before and a bit early in the game. I think that the fact that it was a wet, scrappier, more congested game probably suits the Bombers and their prep heading into the season. Like, we had near perfect conditions last week against Richmond, which helped us set up our ball use and our free-flowing footy. This week it's a lot harder to play. It's harder to first grab the footy, harder to dispose of it efficiently. I think that's a good thing. Having that experience heading into a season where you play two different styles of football is definitely an underrated aspect of this game, even though it definitely suited our opposition more. The fact that we got to play it, I think, is beneficial. I would much rather play the type of game that we played in this match here, where it's a bit harder to play footy, I guess, than what we had last week, where it's 30 degrees sunny, because realistically, this is a winter sport. A lot of the footy this year is going to be in the rain, so the fact that we have that experience early is definitely, it's a benefit, it's a good thing. But yeah, it definitely suited the Saints. They were the better team all day. They led by 8 points at halftime. It was 50-42. They should have led by more. They missed some really gettable chances early in the game, some sitters pretty much, and then as the game went on, they really got the upper hand. They kicked 10 goals to 4 in the second half, running out 43-point winners. I will say, when coaches are looking at these games, they're not breaking it down in the results. They're not even looking quarter by quarter. They're probably going to be looking at, little 5 to 10 minute patches. And I think every team kind of does it differently. Like the Bulldogs, for example, they give out best and fairest votes for these practice games, which might sound ridiculous, but for them, it's probably to build momentum and morale heading into the season where they get those good performances under the belt. For Essendon, this was clearly about trial and error. We were flicking around the magnets so much. I actually really liked hearing Cam Roberts after the game talk about the fact that maybe they flicked around the magnets a bit too much. But the fact that they're doing that is definitely a sign that we're trying to see what system works with what players in place. Like, the players were moving all over the field, different positions, different structures, different little combos in each zone. And there might be quarters where we're getting completely belted off the park, but coaches will look at little periods in those quarters, like 5-minute periods where certain players are playing alongside each other, and they might take a lot away from that. So that is why you can't really look at results too much in this game, and why, the game itself doesn't really matter as a whole, four-quarter performance. But if we're looking at the four-quarter performance, if you want to focus on that, the reason St. Kilda won for me, the fact is, yes, magnets were moved all over the park from both teams, but the constant throughout this game was St. Kilda having the better players on the park. So I actually think St. Kilda probably had the 5 or 6 best players on field. Obviously, Nasiah was absolutely insane. He was doing everything for them. 4 goals, 20-odd touches. He's one of the best players in the competition. But you also had guys like Marcus Windhager had over 40 disposals. Jack Sinclair had almost 40 disposals and over 800 metres gained. Tom De Koning got off the leash a bit as the game went on. I'd say the Saints had the 5 or 6 best players on the field. And in any game of footy, if you've got the 5 or 6 best players on the park, you're probably going to win the game. That is, a quarter of your team pretty much dominating the field. And to be honest, like, you'd look at these games in regular seasons, we'd probably put tags on these players, things like that. We'd do things to stop the Saints, getting that momentum, getting that domination in areas that they are. But the fact it's a preseason game, we obviously weren't trying to do that. So there were plenty of times where our youngest players were on Nasiah, Wangani and Millera. That wouldn't happen in a regular season. Windhager and Sinclair getting as much of the footy as they did, it might not be an area of focus for this game because we want to test out things with our own system and structure. So the Saints were definitely the better team. And to be honest, I'm actually really excited about St Kilda heading into 2026. I think they're a genuinely good chance to play deep into finals footy. They, the Ross line structure, that defensive system has always been good defensively, but the fact that they're moving the footy as well as they are as well with these elite players, I'd be really excited if I was a St Kilda fan. So obviously St Kilda were the better team out of the two, but I think there were specific zones that I didn't expect that to be the case in. And the one that I was really surprised by, and it's given me a tiny bit of concern, albeit in a practice game, was the midfield. I think they were just, our midfield was probably the strongest zone heading into this game. It's almost full strength, missing Nick Marston, who's out of the season, but the Saints absolutely killed us. They not only smashed us in centre clearances, the more important clearances to win, but they just outworked us entirely around the ground as well. It's why individuals won so much of the footy. Windhager winning 39 disposals is not something you see every day, but they just worked harder to win it. They ran harder than us. I thought our senior players were poor. I thought Caldwell and Durham were not having an impact. Parrish was winning the footy, but it didn't feel as big as last week. Roberts was probably the one who looked the liveliest, both offensively and defensively. Is that because he's just a better runner than his teammates? And if so, is that a worry? The fact that, guys like Parrish and Merritt, and even Caldwell to an extent, like they're not amazing aerobic athletes. Is that something we should be concerned about? I'm not 100% sure. But even if that's the case, I'd expect us to be a lot better at the contest than we were. I think our contested work as an engine room on paper stacks up, probably better than St Kilda's a lot of the time. So that was really surprising to me. I'm not entirely worried about it yet, but it's just probably the thing I disliked most out of this game was the fact that our midfield was genuinely poor. And as we found out with the Tigers last week, as you lose that centre bounce battle in a heavy way, it really does just put you on the back foot, and dominoes start to fall down. If your midfield's falling apart, it puts your defence under so much pressure. Our backline was under pressure all game, and unfortunately it was also just not assertive enough when it mattered as well. The Saints didn't have a classy, an A-grade forward line, going their way. They had Max King off to the side. They've got players missing in that forward line, but I still think our key defenders a lot of the time were not assertive enough. And in the case of Ben Mackay, who was fantastic last week against the Tigers, one of our best players, I thought he was far too timid a lot of the time in this game. And this is, obviously he was playing a different role. He was more that defensive defender like Zach Reed was last week. But if he's playing that way, he really has to be better in the air, because there were far too many times when even guys like Mitch Owens outbodied him, and that just should not be happening. I get that Mitch Owens is a more athletic key forward and can outmark him that way, but Mackay was so focused on the body a lot of the time, and Owens just had almost uncontested marks in some occasions. So I thought our defense was kind of a combo of the midfield putting the defense under pressure, the defense not being assertive enough in the air, on ground level as well at times, although that was a better showing, I thought, from our ground level defenders. And then of course you look at even defensive 50 stoppages. That's not something I associate the Bombers being bad at, I guess, but there were far too many times where the Saints found space in those D50 stoppages. Players like McRae getting snaps in open space. That really shouldn't be the case in wet weather footy. I thought that was really frustrating, the fact that we just let them have chances and opportunities at goals while there was congestion and numbers around the footy in those stoppages. I get it happening in open play and transition and everything, but when you've got numbers set around the footy, when there is a stoppage inside 50 and you've got numbers around the footy, I don't get how you can still give your opposition space. And at times there were, wingers like Pryor, and even just those ground level defenders and midfielders just losing focus when it matters most. There are some teams in the competition who are really just not on their game with D50 stoppages. I've never associated the Bombers as one of those teams, but it felt that way at times in this game. I reckon what I saw most as a criticism from the fan base was the long bombs inside 50 to Pax, just putting it on players' heads and hoping for the best. I honestly think against St Kilda, that is how teams are forced to play a lot of the time. I think it's really tough to play St Kilda because they are so good at buying into a defensive structure. They just throw numbers back behind the footy. It's why the inside 50 count was honestly pretty even, because you had St Kilda having, 6, 7, 8, 9 players back in their D50, Essendon having numbers on the outside. It was kind of just at times Essendon bombing it inside 50, the Saints rebounding straight to an Essendon player, repeat. And that's kind of the way you play against St. Kilda. They are so good defensively. They're so structured, setting up players in the right spots. They not only have one-on-one matchups to negate the forwards, that can run and jump, but they've also got holes kind of plugged there for those short kicks. So it's a really hard team to play against, and I think that's why it's a good opportunity to play against this team, especially in harder conditions, because it showed us, we're still not a good team going inside 50. And against St. Kilda, that's going to be the case with a young Essendon team, but I'm not too worried about the bombing inside 50. I think that's often how you have to play. You just have to hope that those contested markers can really bring it to ground, and unfortunately, Wright and Caddy weren't able to do so, and we only really had one ground level small forward, so it was tough going to find options for goals inside 50, but the lack of a plan B at times was a bit frustrating. I thought, a lot of the time, the wrong players were the ones going inside 50. We didn't get the ball in the right hands, even if we had the opportunity to do so. That's what I was a bit frustrated by, not the bombing itself, because that's bound to happen, but the fact that we didn't try and get the right players bombing it inside or finding the options inside. So I'm not too worried about our entries inside 50 yet, or not more worried than I would have been. I'm always going to be worried because it's kind of an intrinsic part of our game that we're going to bomb it on heads. But for this particular game, it wasn't a huge area of concern for me, not more so than the midfield. Now, something else I want to talk about that's probably brushed over because of the lack of meaning in the result is the umpiring, and not the decisions themselves. I never blame umpires for a loss or a win. I don't think they play as big a part in games as what people think, but Essendon fans have always felt hard done by umpiring decisions, whereas teams like Geelong and Brisbane don't talk about them as much. It's not because umpires favour certain teams, it's because certain teams respond to umpiring decisions differently. So you'll see in this game, 50-metre penalties go against the Bombers, or decisions go against the Bombers. We are always quick to argue with the umpires or seek clarification with the umpires rather than focusing on the game. Like, the game will be playing and you'll see players talking to the umps or complaining and, losing focus. And that is the problem with the Bombers these last few years. We've had a few games where fans will say the umpires lost the game for us. It's not the decisions that lose the game, it's the way that teams respond to those decisions. Even like after a goal that goes against us that, probably was undeserved with an umpiring call, I noticed a few times the Saints would win it out of the next centre bounce and kick another goal straight after. It's losing focus after things go against you, and I noticed that in this game. It doesn't get talked about as much because obviously the result doesn't matter as much, but this has been an intrinsic part in our game for a few years now, and it's why Essendon fans always feel more hard done by umpiring decisions. It's because we allow those decisions to play a bigger part in the game than they should. I never think umpiring decisions play a result in the actual, result, win or loss. I've never thought that way. I've never thought that Essendon lost a game because of umpiring, but we do often lose games and lose focus because of how we react to the umpiring. And also, I guess, just continuing on that losing focus side of things, yes, there's defending, there's zoning. We lost focus throughout the game in the way we were playing, but I also thought that the over-aggression was a sign of losing focus as well, whether it be guys like Archie Roberts decking players with downfield free kicks after they've kicked the footy. That is stuff that players should know better not to do. When a player is disposed of the footy, just leave them be. You don't need that extra toughness, because yes, you might hurt them and put them under a bit of pressure the next time they have the footy, but you've also just given your opposition a chance at goal inside 50. So that was annoying. That's a sign of loss of focus. But the big one for me is the Sam Durham tackle, and I think this is going to be a big talking point whether or not he gets suspended. I personally, I couldn't tell you. The rules are so hard to understand, but the fact that we're talking about it and it's a point of discussion in a pre-season game is a huge sign that Sam Durham just clearly lost focus and let his aggression get the better of him. I thought, some will say it's a perfectly timed tackle, but unfortunately, when you have that double motion, when you're bringing a player to the ground when they're on both feet with their arms pinned, you are always at risk of a suspension, and that's part of the game. Like, if his head hits the floor there and he's concussed, Sam Durham's out for 3 weeks. That is just, it might be frustrating for players to understand the rules, but they should know better, especially in a pre-season game, not to be overly aggressive with their tackling. And unfortunately, like, you guys might say it's a perfect tackle, I think it was too aggressive, and I wouldn't be surprised if he is suspended just for a week for that Hawthorn game. We definitely challenge it. It's definitely 50-50. It's a line ball call, but the fact that it is a 50-50 call means it's probably not the right thing to be doing, especially in a pre-season game. And that's something Sam Durham's, he's always been a tough player that plays on the edge, but when you're playing on the edge in the pre-season, that's a sign of loss of focus. But I think for the most part, like, a good thing to focus on with these negatives is the fact that you can point to the timing as a big component of them. Like, if this game is played in the regular season in April or May, it is going to look a lot different. Like, as I said, there's a loss of focus, but a big part of that could be, the preseason, the fact it's a preseason game. We couldn't keep up with the Saints. Is that a sign of fitness, or is it a team not prioritizing preseason matches? I think it's probably the latter of the two. We didn't tag their best players who were dominating. Like, is that because we are silly up in the coach's box seeing Naz and co, dominate, or is it because we are prioritizing, I guess the way that the game plays out in the system? Because, we wouldn't put Contagianis on Nazire Wanganeen-Miller in the home and away season. We'd put other players on him. We'd clamp down on Sinclair winning the footy, clamp down on Windhager, but we didn't do that. That is the sign that it's a preseason game. Like, I get that it's easy to see these trends and signs and react to them, but realistically, we don't know if some of these things that are occurring are trends and aspects to worry about, or if it's just an indication that this is well and truly a meaningless preseason match and nothing more. So if we get into the year and we're struggling to keep up with teams and we're not tagging, we can point back to this result and say that, we should have seen it coming. But if we go out and run teams off the park, it'll show you just how different these preseason games can be perceived, because other teams, good teams in the competition, do that as well. Like, I'm not worried about Hawthorn's keeping up with the better midfields after what we saw against the Bulldogs, but they were blown off the park as well, and so were better teams, than Essendon. So the fact that we've got doubts for justifiable reasons, but also questions over the legitimacy of those reasons, I think that is definitely something that we can point to being a preseason match. But if these trends begin to occur in the regular season, then we can point back to this match and say, maybe we should have seen it coming earlier. Yeah, there was a lot to dislike about this game, realistically, and I'm sure you guys will find some more negatives in the comments, and I'm happy to see how you guys read the game. But there was also a lot to like that people are kind of just glossing over because of the result. I thought at times our ball movement was really exciting and effective. So there were times where there were some really good handball chains in the wet, kicking chains as well, that led to goals. My favourite was the Angus Clark goal, where we just kind of tapped the ball along, got it forward at all costs, lots of soccers along the wet deck, just trying to move the footy quickly, even if it wasn't, pretty and classy footy. We were trying to just prioritise moving the ball forward to get it into the forward line, and it resulted in a goal. And that is kind of the way that we want to play, getting that footy just moving as quickly as it could. And that was a really good sign against a solid St Kilda defence and system, that we could still, at our best do that. And I thought there were times, especially early in the game, where we also stemmed their ball movement and made it hard for them to move the footy, kind of forcing them to kick sideways a little bit like we did with Richmond last week. So it shows that, yes, we were not consistent with our efforts and consistent with our, how we held up both offensively and defensively, but there were signs in this game that we could match it with a really good St Kilda team. And I think the coaches will take a lot of positivity and confidence out of that, especially seeing, I guess, what system and structure they had in place for those moments and periods of the game. But also, I think most of the positives really come from individuals. There were some really good individual performances from this game, and I think for starters, Lockie Blackiston's probably the big one for me. Like, this is someone I talked about a lot last week, and yes, he kind of dominated Richmond a bit, but it was against an older Toby Nankervis who's probably had the game go past him a bit. This week against TDK, I think overall De Koning had the better of him, but Blackiston started having a big impact on that game in that first quarter. He was great early, especially in that first term. I'd say he was almost best on ground in the first quarter, at least for the Bombers, and that is super exciting, because this was a huge test for Blackiston, seeing how he went against the genuine best rucks in the game, and the rucks that I guess the rules benefit the most. And TDK, yes, he got the upper hand, yes, he was one of the better players to end the game, but I thought Blackiston really matched it with him for a lot of this match, and that was a really good sign that Blackiston can do the same against, guys like Meek and Reeves at Hawthorn, and then Port Adelaide the next week, even Cherry again the week after. Brian coming back is obviously going to change how the team looks, whether we have a dual ruck setup. But to start the season, I've got a lot of faith that Blackiston is the right man to be that main ruck. And he showed a lot. Obviously, his ball use at times was a bit questionable. That's always been the case with Blackiston. But even the way he sat back in defence and kind of helped us plug holes as that, extra man down back, he moved around the ground so well. I was really impressed by Blackiston in this game. If we continue talking about the senior players, I thought Kyle Langford, he's clearly showing that he's having just a great preseason. I thought he was awesome last week against Richmond. I'd almost say he was just about our best player on the field in this game against the Saints. I'm not going to do votes, but if I was doing votes, he'd be getting 3, 2, or 1. He'd be right in the votes. He kicked the 2 goals. He was really good in the air and when other players maybe weren't, but also just his work around the ground to find space and isolate players around him by, moving himself with the footy. I think he does so much as a mobile key forward, and he's showing that he really should be in that forward line, probably, creating a bit less room for players like Archer May, who I'll talk about in a second as well. But Kyle Langford was awesome. I thought Peter Wright showed some signs as well. Braden Fiorini, another one of those senior players. This is probably a great sign of the type of game that he's going to play, winning those 20 touches, hitting the scoreboard. He obviously kicked the 3 behinds last week, 2 more behinds in this game, but the fact he's getting those opportunities and kicking a goal in this game as well, that's 6 scoring shots in the last 2 weeks. That is the type of footy we're going to see from Braden Fiorini. At times he is both the deepest man forward, but also the deepest man back. There was a few times in this game where he took a mark or won the ball on the last line of defense as well. So his hard work was really great on that wing, and he's clearly just a starter for round 1. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of praise for the young players because most of the team is made of young players, but there were some really impressive performances in this game. Obviously, Archie Roberts, some would say he was best on ground for us. His foot skills were a bit wasteful at times, but his hunger and just, determination to get around the field in that midfield is something that we are clearly lacking. Like, he might not be the best by foot, but he makes us more stable defensively in the guts. And the fact that he was in there more than Merritt, I think, was quite telling. I thought that Zach Johnson and Nguyen behind the footy were awesome in defence. Zach Johnson is, I think he's a certified starter for round 1. He's played 2 really impressive back-to-back pre-season games. I thought Nguyen was just so tough at the footy, winning more of the footy as well, which is really what we wanted to see out of him. But then you get to the draftees who are all in line to play round 1. I thought Huss showed more great signs up forward. That goal was awesome. Farrow and Kondo were a bit quieter but composed when they had the pill, but really Dyson Sharp was the best of the bunch. Like, he barely featured in a centre bounce all game, but his work rate on that forward flank to move around the ground was absolutely brilliant. His foot skills weren't perfect, but he at least knows where to put the ball, and often that is all it takes. I think this was the best I've seen Dyson Sharp play against senior bodies in quite some time. So that should give us a lot of confidence because it is a good St Kilda team. It's better than Sandford, but he's proved to me that he can play on that flank, and that's something I really doubted with Dyson Sharp. Only if he continues to work hard, obviously, because realistically, like, this guy isn't fit, he isn't fast, he isn't really an athlete, he's not the best by foot, but he works so hard for his team, and that kind of effort from someone who doesn't have that natural, talent or aerobic capacity is almost inspirational at times. The fact that Dyson Sharp inserts himself into games despite, not having the natural talent of some of the other draftees, I thought he had a really, really good game, Dyson Sharp. I thought he was fantastic. You're also looking at the round 1 team, and it's a bit easier to predict. So we really only played with the 24 players for most of the game, kind of as rotations. So Archer May came on in the last quarter, Perkins came on in the last half, Sardell Hawley came on in the last quarter as well with Archer May. You also had guys like Xavier Dersma rested after halftime. I think Peter Wright didn't play the last quarter. Parrish might have been rested a lot in the game as well. So we were trying to rotate as we would in an AFL game with 23 to 24 players on the bench. But the fact that guys like Archer May, Sard, and Archie Perkins didn't play full games probably shows that they're maybe on the outer, in the emergencies squad rather than in that best 23 for round 1 against the Hawks. Obviously, Perkins coming back from injury, and we'll talk about him more in the individual player video on Tuesday. But it tells me that, May's probably not in that round 1 team. Sard probably isn't in that round 1 team. And the 23 to 24 players you saw play most of this game are well and truly in the frame to play round 1. Obviously, there's not too many players coming back from injury for the round 1 game. So most of what we saw on the park here is going to be featuring in round 1. So that is really pleasing, the fact that we're narrowing down the options and understanding this round 1 team a little bit more. The thing that's looking harder to predict is where everyone is going to play, because Jackson Pryor on the wing, I just don't know if that's working. I think Xavier Dersma up forward, there's potential there. I think there definitely is. But Pryor on the wing, I was worried about how he'd go in this particular game against better wingmen, and I thought he was caught out quite a bit by St Kilda. And against the Hawks, where they've got, Massimo and Weddle, that's going to be a tougher matchup. So Pryor on the wing, I'm not sold yet. Zach Merritt deep forward, I don't think makes much sense at all. I think it makes sense in State of Origin when he's alongside, some of the best players in the competition, but when he's the deepest forward and he can't really jump and mark at the footy, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, him being there. You've got players moving all over the park. The midfield setup didn't really change too much, but is Dyson Sharp going to run through there? Is Archie Roberts going to run through there? Zach Merritt spent half the game, or less than half the game, in centre bounces, so there are still some questions about what this team looks like, but I think, that's what this game is for. They're not going to look at the whole four-quarter performance and look at how everyone played and where they played. It's really moments in the games and periods and who looks best alongside who. The fact that they're trialling and erring so much, like we might not see Pryor play on the wing in round one, we might not see Merritt play up forward in round one, but the fact we've got those opportunities and I've seen that this early into the preseason is a good thing. But yeah, my overall vibe from this game is really one of neutrality. Like, I'm not too worried or fussed about anything that occurred in this game. I've got reservations, I've got some positivity coming out of it as well, but we don't know if that is going to translate to the home and away season, and that is why these preseason games are really just fun to talk about, because there's just so much happening. You don't know if it's good, you don't know if it's bad. I guess we'll find out in a few weeks when we take on the Hawks, and that is a big game that we can look forward to. Plenty of videos coming out, guys. Remember, Tuesday I've got the player ratings. I'll have a season preview next week as well, and then the week after, it is all eyes on that round one game against the Hawks. But guys, that is all. Thank you for watching. Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments down below. I want to hear what you guys thought about this preseason game. Stay tuned for Tuesday's video. Make sure you like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new. Thank you to Spotify listeners as well. And as always, go Bombers.